Hello everyone, welcome back to Hit the Apex. I'm Charlie and today we have another video. This time we will be reviewing the 2023 Azerbaijan Grand Prix in round 4 of the 2023 season. Before we get going, make sure to like, share and subscribe to the channel if you are new around here. Dug Out Daily, the football channel, Hit the Apex, the F1 channel, and at MCFC Hibs on Twitter. We will get started then, and we will, of course, start with practice 1. This was the first sprint weekend of the season, so the structure of this weekend was practice 1, qualifying, sprint, shootout, sprint, and then the race. So we will start with practice 1, where Verstappen led Leclerc and Perez in an action-packed practice session in Baku. Max Verstappen topped the timesheets in an eventful first and only practice session of the weekend in Baku, with a Dutch racer leading the way ahead of Charles Leclerc and teammate Sergio Perez in preparations for today's Grand Prix qualifying. With just one 60-minute session available to get to grips with the Baku City Circuit under the new sprint format, the drivers showed their intention was to maximise every second of FP1, led by Verstappen. The majority of the cars lined up at the pit exit waiting for the light to turn green at the start of the session. While Verstappen set the early pace on the medium tyre ahead of Perez and Leclerc, it was not good news for AlphaTauri driver Yuki Tsunoda, who hit the barrier at turn 3 and suffered a right rear puncture, forcing him to pit. Moments later, the red flags were waved due to Pierre Gasly's Alpine catching fire because of a hydraulic issue, with the French driver forced to stop on track. Meanwhile, at the same time, Kevin Magnussen stopped at turn 1 with a suspected fuel pressure problem. Under resumption, Verstappen once again led all the drivers out onto the track except for Esteban Ocon, who did not make an appearance for the rest of the session as his team carried out precautionary checks, bringing an end to a torrid first practice for Alpine. As the drivers switched from the harder compounds to the soft tyres for some qualifying simulation runs, it was Verstappen who left it until his last lap of the session to go fastest, with a time of 1 minute 42.315 seconds to lead Leclerc in second by just 0.037 seconds. Perez was third fastest ahead of the other Ferrari, Carlos Sainz, who made slight contact with the barrier at turn 5, with Lando Norris showcasing the pace of the upgraded McLaren MCL 60 to round out the top 5. Nick de Vries, one of two drivers on the grid alongside Logan Sargent, yet to score a point, was 6th for AlphaTauri, ahead of the Aston Martin pair of Lance Stroll and Fernando Alonso. Alex Albon was 9th fastest for Williams, ahead of the Alfa Romeo, Zhou Guanyu in 11th place Lewis Hamilton, who recovered from a brake issue on his Mercedes W14 that forced him to pit early in the session. Oscar Piastri, who spent much of the session testing new parts for McLaren, was 12th, ahead of 2019 Azerbaijan Grand Prix winner Valtteri Bottas in the other Alfa Romeo and the AlphaTauri of Tsunoda. Nico Hülkenberg was 15th fastest for Haas, ahead of Williams Logan Sargent and Mercedes George Russell, who, like his teammate Hamilton, did not set a fast time on the soft tyre. Down at the bottom were the three drivers whose sessions ended early, with Ocon and Gasly in 18th and 19th, while Magnussen was last. Qualifying for Sunday's Azerbaijan Grand Prix began at 5 p.m. local time on Friday evening, and we will move to that session then, where Leclerc beat Verstappen in qualifying thriller for third straight Azerbaijan Grand Prix pole. Charles Leclerc claimed pole position for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix after getting the better of Max Verstappen in a thrilling, hotly contested qualifying session on Friday evening, making it 3 poles on the bounce at the Baku City Circuit. With the Red Bull faster in a straight line but the Ferrari quicker through the corners, a fascinating battle developed over the course of an incident-packed qualifying hour on the shores of the Caspian Sea, and it was Leclerc who ultimately came out on top. Incredibly, Verstappen and Leclerc posted identical 1 minute 40.445 second lap times before their first Q3 runs, only for Leclerc to step forward with a 1 minute 40.203 second on the decisive final laps, putting him 0.188 seconds up on Verstappen, with Leclerc adding to his 2021 and 2022 poles at the venue, Verstappen settling for second and Sergio Perez securing third in the other Red Bull. It was Carlos Sainz who took the best of the rest spots, some 8 tenths off the pace of his Ferrari teammate. Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso were 5th and 6th, respectively, for Mercedes and Aston Martin. McLaren's Lando Norris and AlphaTauri's Yuki Tsunoda took eye-catching P7 and P8 spots, with Lance Stroll and Oscar Piastri rounding out the top 10. While Hamilton, who featured in the top 10 shootout, it was an early qualifying bath for his teammate George Russell, who had to settle for 11th on the grid ahead of Alpine's Esteban Ocon and the Williams of Alex Albon, who ran firmly inside the top 10 in Q1 but lamented traffic on his last Q2 lap. Valtteri Bottas was the lead Alfa Romeo in 14th, while with Logan Sargent securing his first Q2 appearance on his burgeoning F1 career en route to 15th, making up for drama-filled sessions in Bahrain, Saudi Arabia and Australia. Zhou Guanyu missed the Q2 cut by just 0.02 seconds after recovering from a spin and a near miss, with the barriers leaving him 16th, while Haas lost both Nico Hülkenberg and Kevin Magnussen at the first hurdle, the latter hindered by technical issues throughout Q1. Pierre Gasly and Nick de Vries will form the final row of the grid for Sunday's race, with the Alpine and AlphaTauri drivers crashing out separately at turn 3 in the opening phase, both incidents bringing out the red flags and interrupting the session. So, as it happened then, in Q1, Leclerc leads a dramatic first phase. There was plenty of intrigue heading into Saturday evening's qualifying session on the high-speed streets of Baku, with the preceding first practice featuring a host of incidents and costing several drivers valuable track time amid the revised F1 sprint format. Alpine were one team in a particular hurry between sessions as they pushed to carry out a power unit and gearbox change for Gasly after his fiery FP1 stoppage, and they impressively got the Frenchman's car ready thanks to Ocon's mechanics also playing their part. With wind an ever-present challenge and the nature of the track layout providing one of the biggest tests on the F1 calendar, it didn't take long for drama to strike when Q1 got underway. Zhou going for a spin at turn 1 and then surviving a wild moment through turn 15. Shortly afterwards, De Vries brought out the red flags by locking up heavily and running straight into the barriers at turn 3. "Oh my God," was the rookie's anguished message over the radio, with his hopes of building on his encouraging first practice session dashed. At this point, Verstappen, despite an initially loose headrest, led the way with a time of 1 minute 41.887 seconds, a couple of attempts clear of Leclerc, with Alonso holding third from Norris, Hamilton and Hülkenberg. Perez was a distant 8th, having failed to get a clean lap in, while Sainz abandoned his first run and sat at the foot of the order. After the marshals had removed De Vries' car and cleared the track, Q1 resumed with just over 10 minutes left on the clock. But almost as soon as the action had restarted, the red flags were flown again when Gasly took too much speed into turn 3, gave the outside wall another whack and littered debris all over the track. Sainz was fortunate not to join Gasly and De Vries on the sidelines, as he narrowly avoided the barriers with a spin of his own exiting turn 1 before regaining his composure to make it back to the pits and prepare for the second restart. 7.5 minutes left to run. There were plenty of changes at the top during the final runs to the checkered flag, with Leclerc finishing in P1 via a 1 minute 41.269 second lap, just over a 10th clear a long-time leader Verstappen, and another chunk up on Alonso and Perez, who abandoned a much quicker lap when it was clear he would make it through. Russell and Hamilton ended Q1 5th and 6th in the Mercedes, while the high-flying Norris and Albon put their respective McLaren and Williams cars ahead of Sainz's Ferrari and Tsunoda's AlphaTauri, who completed the top 10. Sargent progressed from Q1 for the first time in his F1 career with a strong run to 11th, slotting in front of fellow rookie Piastri. The other Aston Martin Stroll, Bottas and Ocon. That meant Zhou, Hülkenberg and Magnussen, who battled an unspecified technical problem from start to finish, and the sideline Gasly and De Vries dropped out. So knocked out in Q1 was Zhou, Hulkenberg, Magnussen, Gasly and De Vries. So in Q2 then, Verstappen was fastest as a Mercedes misses the cut. Following a short break in the pits, the remaining 15 drivers charged back out onto the track for the Q2 segment, with the sun beginning to set and cast growing shadows across the track, only adding to the challenge behind the wheel. Perez built on his aborted lap at the end of Q1 to promptly go quickest with a 1 minute 41.131 second lap, 0.062 seconds up on Verstappen, with Leclerc also inside a 10th of the pace in third. Leclerc's next lap, a 1 minute 41.037 second lap, put him back in P1, while teammate Sainz's efforts to make a similar improvement led to him running too deep at turn 3 and taking to the runoff. Red Bull were not finished though, with Verstappen lighting up the timing screens on his final lap, the reigning double world champion pumping a 1 minute 40.822 second lap to reclaim top spot ahead of Leclerc, with Perez holding P3 from Sainz and Alonso. Norris continued to impress aboard his updated McLaren en route to 6th, in front of Tsunoda, Stroll and Piastri, while Hamilton grabbed the final spot in Q3 at the expense of teammate Russell, who swore over the radio when informed on his qualifying exit. Ocon had to settle for 12th on a difficult day for Alpine, while Albon rode what might have been in 13th after traffic impacted his final lap. Bottas took 14th for Alfa Romeo, with the other Williams, a Sargent, completing the Q2 order in 15th. So knocked out in Q2 were Russell, Ocon, Albon, Bottas and Sargent. And finally, Q3, Leclerc beats Verstappen in a pulsating conclusion. As the drivers emerged for the pole position shootout, a remarkable opening exchange saw Verstappen and Leclerc post-matching 1 minute 40.445 second lap times, the Red Bull man slotting ahead due to him crossing the line before his Ferrari rival. But when the second runs got underway, Leclerc picked up the pace again to clock a blistering 1 minute 40.203 second lap, with Verstappen only managing a 1 minute 40.391 second lap and Perez a 1 minute 40.495 second lap, giving the Monegasque a third successive pole around the Baku track. It also marked a much needed change in fortunes for Leclerc, who was last on pole at the 2022 Singapore Grand Prix 6 months ago and endured painful retirements from 2 of the first 3 races this season. Sainz was a long way off the pace for teammate Leclerc and the Red Bulls, finishing some 8/10 back in 4th, followed by the Mercedes of Hamilton and Aston Martin of Alonso, who now faces a tall order to continue his 2023 podium streak. Norris and Tsunoda were 2 of the stars of qualifying on their way to 7th and 8th, marking an upturn in performance for McLaren and AlphaTauri, with Stroll and Piastri the last of the Q3 runners. So the key quote of this session: "For sure, I'm surprised," said Pole Sitter Leclerc. "We came into the weekend thinking that it would be a great weekend if we are ahead of Aston and Mercedes in qualifying, and at the end we're on pole, so it's a really good surprise. We must not forget that our race car is maybe still behind the Red Bulls, so it's going to be difficult to keep the lead, but that's the target. I'm really, really happy with the lap. It's a very challenging weekend for us all as drivers. Because there's very little time to practice. We only had one FP1 and then you need to be straight on it in qualifying, but the feeling was good since the start, so I'm really, really happy." Azerbaijan will host the first F1 sprint of the season on Saturday, with a new sprint shootout set to begin at 12:30 local time, followed by the 100-kilometre sprint race at 5:30. We will move to the sprint shootout then, where Leclerc led the Red Bulls in first ever sprint shootout despite crashing in SQ3. Charles Leclerc topped the first ever sprint shootout and ensured pole for Saturday afternoon sprint ahead of the Red Bulls of Sergio Perez and Max Verstappen. In a dramatic conclusion to qualifying for the sprint, Leclerc hit the barriers, but he had already set the benchmark of 1 minute 41.697 second lap to take sprint pole. Perez improved but could only manage second for the shootout, while Verstappen struggled for grip and took P3. The medium tyre was mandatory for the first and second sessions of qualifying. while teams had to fit a new set of softs for SQ3. In SQ3, George Russell managed P4 for Mercedes, but Carlos Sainz was compromised by his teammates crashing, rounded out the top five ahead of Lewis Hamilton in sixth. Alex Albon was seventh on the board for Williams, ahead of the Aston Martins of Fernando Alonso in P8 and Lance Stroll in P9. Both suffering from DRS issues that carried over from Friday qualifying. Lando Norris rounded out the top 10, having sat out SQ3 without a new set of softs. In SQ2, drivers had 10 minutes to set times, and it was Verstappen who led the Ferraris. In the second segment of the shootout, McLaren's Oscar Piastri was eliminated in P11 ahead of Nico Hülkenberg in the Haas in P12. Esteban Ocon took P13 for Alpine, and Magnussen was left 14th. Logan Sargent qualified a provisional P15 for the sprint, but the Williams driver had crashed in SQ1. The 12-minute SQ1 saw Leclerc, who took pole for Sunday's Grand Prix in a Friday qualifying session, topped the board ahead of Verstappen, while Sargent crashed out at turn 15 to end the session prematurely. Sargent's crash led to the elimination of both Alfa Romeos, Zhou Guanyu qualifying a provisional 16th and Valtteri Bottas 17th, plus a furious Yuki Tsunoda. Pierre Gasly couldn't put down a proper time and ended up 19th, while Nick de Vries, who crashed out of Q1 on Friday, qualified a provisional P20 for the sprint, having made an error at turn 3 in SQ1. There's more excitement to come with a sprint at 5:30 p.m. local time, in which Ferrari's Leclerc will lead the Red Bulls off the line. So as it happened, then we will start in SQ1 where Leclerc blazes a trail before Sargent smashes the wall. This was truly a journey into the unknown as the first ever sprint shootout that would set the grid for the sprint dash to the line later on Saturday. Kicked off, medium compounds were mandatory for the first 12-minute segment of qualifying. First laps in SQ1 saw Grand Prix pole sitter Charles Leclerc return to the top of the timesheets with a time of 1 minute 43.372 second laps, 0.191 seconds ahead of Max Verstappen and nearly a second faster than Aston Martin's Lance Stroll. In the drop zone, meanwhile, sat Nico Hülkenberg, Pierre Gasly and Nick de Vries, who crashed out of Friday's qualifying and went off at turn 3 in SQ1, and then the Alfa Romeos. The session was peppered by yellow flags early on, but it ended under reds when Logan Sargent, perhaps taken aback by a Ferrari ahead of him, smashed his Williams into the barriers exiting turn 15. That left Leclerc top with a lap of 1 minute 42.82 seconds. Max Verstappen second for Red Bull by 0.468 seconds, and Lewis Hamilton third for Mercedes by a margin of 0.741 seconds. The red flag left Alfa Romeo's Zhou Guanyu 16th and 3/10 off safety, while teammate Valtteri Bottas qualified a provisional 17th for the sprint. AlphaTauri's Yuki Tsunoda was audibly furious to settle for P18, having qualified 8th for the race on Sunday, while Alpine's Pierre Gasly was 2 seconds off safety in P19, having failed to set a representative flying lap. De Vries was left last in the other AlphaTauri, having had an off at turn 3 early on in the session. Carlos Sainz finished 4th overall ahead of Mercedes' George Russell and Aston Martin's Fernando Alonso in P6, while Sergio Perez complained of a lack of grip and finished 7th in SQ1. Lance Stroll was left 8th ahead of Lando Norris and Alex Albon, while Albon's teammate Sargent finished 11th but would not emerge for SQ2. Kevin Magnussen finished 12th for Haas. Oscar Piastri brought out early yellow flags in Sector 1 with an off at turn 3, but continued on for P13, and Esteban Ocon took P14 for Alpine. Nico Hülkenberg was the last of the drivers to make it through to SQ2 in P15 for Haas, 0.334 seconds ahead of Zhou. So knocked out in SQ1 was Zhou, Bottas, Tsunoda, Gasly and De Vries. In SQ2, Verstappen comes back while Aston Martin spring DRS issues again. This 10-minute session would eliminate 5 more drivers, and once again medium compounds were mandatory. Drivers rushed to set times, and it was Verstappen who topped the timesheets after the early laps. with a 1 minute 42.417 second lap, 0.395 seconds ahead of Leclerc and 0.508 seconds ahead of teammate Perez. Meanwhile, Norris, Albon, Piastri and Hülkenberg, who locked up at turn 7, were at risk of being knocked out with 4 minutes left. Verstappen did not attempt to improve on his benchmark, but retained top spot as Leclerc improved to go within a tenth of the reigning champion. Sainz improved to P3 despite an off at turn 15, while Perez ended up 4th, having forgone the chance to improve on his first lap. Alonso rounded out the top 5 in SQ1 and gave his teammate Stroll a healthy toll for P8 in an ingenuous bit of teamwork, but it was clear that both were suffering from DRS issues as a hangover from Friday's qualifying between the Aston Martins with the Mercedes, with Hamilton ahead of Russell. Albon took 9 for Williams and Norris took P10. Stroll's late improvement meant Piastri was out in P11. Hülkenberg took 12 out. Ocon was out in P13 for Alpine, and the other Haas and Magnussen was left 14th and almost 2 seconds off the pace. Sargent's SQ1 crash left him out of SQ2 and a provisional P15 for the sprint. So knocked out in SQ2 was Piastri, Hülkenberg, Ocon, Magnussen and Sargent. And in SQ3, Leclerc takes provisional sprint pole, then hits the wall. The frenetic and dramatic shootout would end with 8 minutes, this time drivers donning soft tyres to set the top 10 of the grid for Saturday evening's sprint, and it was Leclerc who set the agenda early on once again without a toll, with a time of 1 minute 41.697 second laps. With a time of 1 minute 41.697 second lap. With 2 minutes left and time for just one flying lap, Perez, who had a toll, was 0.179 seconds off in P2, while Verstappen was third by 0.443 seconds, having made a mistake in Sector 2. The Monegasque added yet another twist to his captivating script as he hit the barriers at turn 5, bringing out yellows, but Verstappen and Perez were ineffective. Perez improved, but only enough to qualify second and 0.147 seconds off the pace. Verstappen couldn't trump Leclerc's time either and ended up 0.29 seconds off the pace. Russell was a surprise P4 as Sainz's final lap time was compromised by his teammate's crash, leaving the Spaniard 5th and Russell's teammate Hamilton 6th. Albon finished 7th ahead of Alonso and Stroll, with the Aston Martins hampered by a lack of DRS, and without a new set of soft tyres, Norris sat out the session to take P10 on the grid for the first sprint of 2023. So the key quote of this session then: the rear overheated on the second lap. I tried to push a bit more to gain some lap time, and as I was behind my first best lap time and I lost it in turn 5. At the end, it doesn't have any consequence on qualifying, said sprint pole sitter Leclerc. I don't know about Carlos behind me. It's a shame if he was improving, but happy with the first lap. Very happy with the first lap, and now we have to confirm that in the race. I'll do everything for it in the sprint. We are here for that at the end. Ferrari needs to be on top, and I'll do absolutely everything to win. Drivers will now take a break before lining up on the grid for the 100-kilometre sprint race at 5:30 local time. We will move to that then. Of course, we're talking about the sprint where Perez beats Leclerc and Verstappen to victory in action-packed Baku sprint. Sergio Perez claimed the first sprint race victory of the season at the Baku City Circuit on Saturday afternoon, beating Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen to the checkered flag for the maximum 8 points on offer. With F1's sprint format being revised for 2023, a new shootout qualifying session set the grid for the 17-lap dash, which took place in pleasant weather conditions and featured action from start to finish. One driver who did not take part was F1 rookie Logan Sargent, who crashed out of the shootout and was withdrawn from the 100-kilometre sprint due to the significant damage his Williams car sustained in the incident. Meanwhile, the grid was another car lighter after Alpine made suspension changes on Esteban Ocon's car under parc ferme conditions, with the team enduring a particularly challenging weekend on the shores of the Caspian Sea. When the start lights turned on one by one and eventually went out, with all drivers on medium tyres apart from the soft-shod Lando Norris and Valtteri Bottas, pole sitter Leclerc jumped out of his grid slot to maintain the lead into turn one, with Perez holding P2. Behind, an incredible scrap ensued between Verstappen and the fast-starting George Russell, with the pair going side by side through the opening sequence of corners before the Mercedes nosed ahead of the Red Bull at turn 3. Verstappen was not a happy man after conceding the position, talking to the radio and accusing Russell of barging his way through. Replays confirming contact and a thump of the wall for the reigning two-time world champion. Just as Verstappen lit up the airwaves and requested an FIA investigation, AlphaTauri's Yuki Tsunoda understeered into the wall at the exit of turn 13 following contact with teammate Nick De Vries, littering debris and his rear right tyre over the circuit. With a virtual safety car deployed, Leclerc held P1 from Perez, Russell, Verstappen and teammate Carlos Sainz, with Fernando Alonso clearing Williams' Alex Albon to put his Aston Martin on the tail of Lewis Hamilton's Mercedes. Despite losing a wheel, Tsunoda limped his way back to the pits and mechanics attempted to make repairs. However, it became clear as soon as he rejoined the track that the damage was terminal, forcing the full safety car to make an appearance, under which Ocon opted for a cheap stop and switched to softs. With drivers cruising around behind Bird Mylander, Red Bull radioed Verstappen to confirm floor damage. How, Verstappen replied. His engineer then replied, "How do you think?" That prompted further frustration from Verstappen, who added, "Mate, I don't understand how we can keep the position and he's damaging my car." Up front, there were concerns for leader Leclerc, who reported a cut, later confirmed to be a cat, on the radio, but the Monegasque quickly had to turn his attentions to the race restart, with the safety car peeling into the pits and the green flag action resuming at the end of lap 5. Leclerc mastered the restart to keep his advantage at turn 1, with Perez again holding on to second, as Verstappen made up for his opening lap disappointment by finding a way back past Russell for the final podium spot as things stood. Sainz pulled off some robust defending to retain fifth, while Alonso pounced on Hamilton to gain another position and rise to sixth. A few car lengths behind, Albon kept himself in the final points paying position, with Stroll and Norris for company. Shortly after the race restarted, Perez got within DRS range of Leclerc and made a clean overtake after the lengthy start-finish straight, as the pair moved on to lap 8, with Verstappen sitting a second and a half back. Perez dropped Leclerc as he moved into clean air, with all eyes shifting to Verstappen in third, who proceeded to lap significantly quicker than Leclerc and put pressure on this weekend's double pole sitter. Further back, Oscar Piastri pulled a pass on McLaren teammate Norris to move up to 10th, with Norris gambled to start the race on soft tyres being ditched in favour of a second stint on mediums. Ocon seen following suit with a second stop, and Bottas reporting that his red marked rubber was starting to melt. As the race entered its closing stages, Stroll found a way past Albon into turn 1 to provisionally take the final point on offer, while Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hulkenberg caused further excitement by going to battle over 11th in the two Haas's. Perez maintained his composure up front with the final laps ticked by, ultimately taking the checkered flag almost 5 seconds clear of Leclerc, who managed to keep Verstappen at bay for the runner-up spot. Russell and Sainz followed in 4th and 5th respectively, with Alonso, Hamilton and Stroll securing the final points on offer, denying Albon and Piastri, who followed that pack closely across the line. Magnussen ultimately led Haas's charge in 11th, with Hulkenberg tumbling all the way down to 15th late on amid tyre struggles. That allowed Alfa Romeo's Zhou Guanyu and the recovering Alpine and AlphaTauri cars of Pierre Gasly and De Vries to move ahead. Bottas opted against the switch from softs to mediums and logged a distant 16th place, followed by final finishes Norris and Ocon, while Tsunoda watched from the sidelines after his early accident. It was good, said sprint race winner Perez. With these tricky sessions, it's been a lot of pressure put on us and our teams, engineers, mechanics, drivers. So to get away with maximum points was the main objective. But obviously, we know that tomorrow is the main race. We were able to learn a bit for the Grand Prix, but obviously tomorrow we're going to be on much higher fuel loads and track conditions are going to be different. I think there is good learning today. P3 is not ideal for tomorrow's race, but I will give it a go and fight for the win. Gasly and De Vries made up the most places across the 17-lap race, rising 4 spots from P17 and P18, while Norris was the biggest loser, falling 7 positions from P10 to P17 after starting on soft tyres. After Saturday's standalone sprint action, the F1 field will now get ready for the main event on Sunday afternoon, the 2023 Azerbaijan Grand Prix, which will be a 51-lap race. We will move to the race then, where Perez heads a Red Bull 1-2 in dramatic Azerbaijan Grand Prix to cut Verstappen's championship lead. Sergio Perez doubled up on the streets of Baku by adding to his sprint race win with victory in Sunday's Azerbaijan Grand Prix, leading Red Bull teammate Max Verstappen and Ferrari's Charles Leclerc home to boost his title push. Verstappen and Perez overhauled pole sitter Leclerc in the early stages and proceeded to trade fastest lap times at the head of the field, with the defining moment of the race coming when a safety car was deployed either side of the Red Bull drivers pit in, with Verstappen pitting under yellow flags brought out when Nick De Vries stopped on track and Perez coming in under a safety car that followed. The Mexican cleared his teammate and rejoined the action in the lead. Verstappen fell to third, meaning he had to overtake Leclerc for a second time. While that was a formality when the race resumed, he could not make inroads on Perez during the run to that checkered flag and had to settle for second. Leclerc held off a late charge from Fernando Alonso to take third, meaning the two-time champions' 2023 podium race came to an end, though fourth still represented another strong haul of points for the Aston Martin driver. Carlos Sainz crossed the line fifth in the other Ferrari, fending off Lewis Hamilton's Mercedes in the closing stages, with the Aston Martin and Lance Stroll and Silver Arrow with George Russell picking up minor points after a close call in the pits early on. Esteban Ocon and Nico Hülkenberg rose from the pit lane to hold points-paying positions for much of the race as they extended their first stints on hard tyres, but late mandatory pit stops meant they were banking on more safety car drama that never arrived. McLaren's Lando Norris moved into the points with a late move on Hülkenberg before gaining another spot when Ocon pitted, while Yuki Tsunoda rounded out the top 10 to salvage a result for AlphaTauri. Oscar Piastri, Alex Albon, Kevin Magnussen and Pierre Gasly all narrowly missed out on points as they completed a close midfield pack ahead of final finishes Ocon, Logan Sargent, Hülkenberg and Valtteri Bottas, the latter making 3 trips to the pit lane amid tyre woes. Bottas' Alfa Romeo teammate Zhou Guanyu pulled into the pits late on with an unspecified technical issue, with De Vries the other retirement after his aforementioned visit to the wall at turn 5 in the early stages, which caused terminal damage. With back-to-back Baku wins, which adds to his 2021 Grand Prix victory at this venue, Perez cuts Verstappen's championship lead to single figures heading to the next round of the season in Miami, which follows in a week's time. Perez, who also took home the Driver of the Day award, could have made up further ground in the driver standings had it not been for a late stop from Russell, who bolted on a set of softs to grab the fastest lap point. With an action-packed standalone sprint behind them, teams regrouped, debriefed and got ready for Sunday's 51-lap main event using the grid that had been set during Friday evening's qualifying session, Leclerc taking pole from Verstappen and Perez. 2 drivers missing from the grid were Ocon and Hülkenberg, whose respective Alpine and Haas teams made suspension setup changes on the part firming conditions, sending them both to the pit lane for the start of the race. Most of the field chose medium tyres for their opening stints, with only De Vries, Ocon, and Hulkenberg taking a different strategic route on hards. Degradation on the soft rubber proving to be particularly high across Saturday's 17-lap 100-kilometre sprint. As the lights went out, pole sitter Leclerc made a smooth getaway to hold his head into turn one, with Red Bull pair Verstappen and Perez slotting into second and third, followed by Sainz, Hamilton and Alonso. Followed further back, the turn two bottleneck led to Piastri doing his best to shake off a bout of food poisoning this week and getting caught in an Albon Bottas sandwich, with Magnussen also delayed at the exit. Verstappen hugged the rear of Leclerc's car over the first couple of laps, threatening to get a run down the lengthy main straight, but the reigning double world champion bided his time and waited for DRS to be activated at the start of the third tour. Heading on to lap 4, Leclerc was a sitting duck and duly Verstappen breezed past across the start-finish straight, with Perez immediately latching onto the back of the Ferrari and almost making a similar move next time around. Perez had to wait another lap before he got ahead, hitting the DRS button, pulling to the inside on the run to turn one and forcing his way past at the apex. The two drivers leaving just enough space to avoid wheel-to-wheel contact. At this point, Verstappen led Perez almost 1.5 seconds, with Leclerc and Sainz continuing the 2x2 squad formation ahead of Hamilton, Alonso and Stroll, who vowed not to attack his teammate and continued to benefit from DRS. Only 7 laps in, Gasly and Bottas ditched their starting sets and mediums to go for hards, with plenty more midfield runners making their move shortly afterwards, but the Red Bulls and Ferraris continued to press on up front and extend their first stints. Hamilton was the first of the front runners to pit from fresh tyres from fifth on lap 10, releasing the fast approaching Aston Martins of Alonso and Stroll, with attentions turning to when Verstappen, Perez and Leclerc would do the same. Up front, having dispatched of Leclerc, Perez began to close in on leader Verstappen and knock on the door at DRS range, pumping in a sequence of fastest laps while his teammate complained over the radio that I'm sliding all over the track. On lap 11, with De Vries clipping the wall at turn 5, coming to a halt just before the turn 6 barriers and bringing out the yellow flags, Verstappen jumped into the pits to swap from mediums to hards, the safety car then being deployed to cover the sidelined AlphaTauri. These circumstances played out beautifully for Perez, who was able to make his stop a lap later under the caution, and with all drivers running at much slower speeds to head back out on track in the lead. Following a flurry of pit lane activity, Perez held P1 from Leclerc, Verstappen, Sainz, Alonso, Russell and Stroll, the yet-to-stop Ocon and Hulkenberg, and Hamilton, the 7-time world champion, like Verstappen, losing out from his stop prior to the safety car. As the train ran around behind Bird Myland, the replay showed a tussle between Russell and Stroll at the entrance to the pits, with a Mercedes man taking advantage of his slow-moving rival, who had been preparing for a double stack at the Aston Martin garage. At the end of lap 13, Mylander pitted to release the field once more, with Perez executing a textbook restart to surge into clean air, while Verstappen pounced on Leclerc for second on the run to turn 3, after which Alonso jumped Sainz with an opportunistic move at turn 4. With his pit lane antics still causing a stir, Russell lost places to Stroll and Hamilton over successive laps, prompting him to radio the Mercedes pit wall and apologise for his efforts behind the wheel. He said, "Well, that was a shit restart, sorry guys." Just as Perez settled into a rhythm, a potentially unsafe release from the pit lane was noted by the stewards, but fears of a penalty were short-lived as the panel confirmed no further action was required, allowing the Mexican to focus on the task at hand. Moments later, Stroll was fortunate not to follow De Vries into retirement, as he also clipped the wall on the inside of turn 5 but avoided serious damage and continued on his way, with Hamilton closing in and applying some pressure. Having cleared Perez and Red Bull of any wrongdoing, the stewards noted the incident involving Russell and Stroll under braking for the pit lane entry, but they swiftly came to the same conclusion that full investigation was not necessary. With the race reaching one-third distance, Perez led Verstappen by just over a second, while Leclerc had dropped some 5 seconds back in third, followed by Alonso, Sainz, Stroll, the two Mercedes, and Ocon and Hulkenberg, who were still yet to stop. Stroll's erratic race continued with a mistake at the exit of turn 16, enabling Hamilton to get in his slipstream on the run to turn 1 and claim P6, with the Aston Martin promptly failing into the clutches of Russell, who was keen to make up for lost ground at the restart. After a few laps running just behind the fellow Mercedes-powered Stroll, Russell radioed his engineer to suggest a move to Plan B, predicting that the Aston Martin was set for a tyre-related struggle. The balance between 1 and 2 stops finally poised. A phase of relative calm followed as the laps ticked by, with Ocon and Hulkenberg brushing the wall at the exit of the tricky turn 15. The most dramatic moments to report, given that the starting sets of tyres were beginning to fade. The balance between the diff and engine braking is not good, Verstappen reported over the radio as the race reached lap 30, with replays showing a couple of close calls as he pushed the limit to keep Perez in sight. A few laps later, Verstappen went a couple of inches further and kissed the barrier at turn 15, with Perez managing to stretch out his advantage to 2.5 seconds. Victory looking more and more likely for the number 11 Red Bull. Off the back of these struggles in the sprint, Bottas made a third stop for new tyres on lap 36, dropping him to the back of the field and almost a lap behind leader Perez, with Alfa Romeo's tough day compounded by a retirement for Joe shortly afterwards. With the top two positions appearing to be settled, Sainz and Hamilton drew the most attention in the closing stages, as the Mercedes got within DRS range and pushed to make an overtake on several occasions, but it could not quite get near enough. A few laps from the finish, Norris worked his way into the points with a move on Hulkenberg at the exit of the turn 5-6 chicane, with the German's tyres looking worse for wear ahead of his required switch to mediums. Promotion to P9 came when Ocon stopped on the final lap. Perez survived a moment of his own at turn 15 to take the checkered flag and complete a commanding win, with Verstappen just over 2 seconds back in the runners-up spot and seeing his title advantage cut to 6 points. Leclerc's pace faded late on while Alonso's ramped up, but it was not enough to change the podium positions as Sainz, Hamilton, Stroll and Russell ensured all Ferrari, Mercedes and Aston Martin cars all scored points. Russell bagging one more for the fastest lap. Norris and Tsunoda were the final scorers in P9 and P10 respectively, with Hulkenberg falling all the way back to 17th and Ocon dropping to 15th when they pitted just before the end of the race. Piastri, Albon, Magnussen and Gasly gained a spot from Ocon's stop, while Sargent was the last driver on the lead lap in 16th, ahead of Hulkenberg, a lap Bottas and the day's two retirements, Joe and De Vries. It really worked out today for us, said race winner Perez. We managed to stay in the DRS train and we managed to keep the pressure on Max. I think we had better deg on that first stint. It was looking good already from that side. Then the safety car came and bunched everyone up, and it was again another race on the hard tyre. I think it was very close between myself and Verstappen. We pushed to the maximum today. We both clipped the wall a few times. We were pushing out there. The way Max pushed me throughout the race was really hard, but we managed to keep him under control. With a back-to-back sequence marking F1's return to action after the April break, the paddock departs Azerbaijan directly to the United States for the Miami Grand Prix, which takes place between the 5th and the 7th of May. So that is it for this video then, everyone. Thank you all so much for watching. Please like, share and subscribe to the channel if you are new around here. Dugout Daily, the football channel. Hit the Apex the F1 channel and at MCFC Hibs on Twitter. Everybody, thank you all so much for watching and we'll speak to you all soon. Take care and goodbye for now.